I've been learning a language for over 2 years, and I figured out what works really well to learn a language and what does not work so well. So in this video, I'm going to be putting out all of the different ways to learn a language and then putting them on a tier list to give you guys an idea of what is effective to learn a language and what is not effective to learn a language. Let's get started. To begin, we have ChatGPT. ChatGPT is surprisingly useful. It has many different features. It allows you to maintain a conversation with another person in a foreign language about any topic you want without any cost to you. You can ask it questions about grammar, and most of the time it will respond the correct way. And you're also able to hear audio from the language that you're studying. Well, not only can you write messages back and forth, but you can also listen to what it says to try to get a grasp on what sounds match what characters. However, it is very limited in a couple of aspects. One, you can't practice your speaking, and the other is that it's very difficult for yourself to go out and use ChatGPT, whereas some of the other methods to learn a language, it's very easy to get you to go out and do it. With ChatGPT, not so much. However, it is still a great way to learn a language or a great tool in your language learning journey. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in B tier. Next, we have music. I think that music is overrated. I've been listening to music for like 2 years in Portuguese, and I don't think it's helped that much, especially when compared to some of the other methods you can use to learn a language. However, there are a couple of things that music has going for it, such as listening. If you practice your listening early on, it's really useful. In that regard, it's effective in introducing you to some audio. However, the main pull, in my opinion, is looking at the lyrics and reading the lyrics and figuring out what lyrics you don't know. Or if you are more advanced in your language, you can listen to the songs, and when you find a word that you don't know, you can plug it into the translator. So although I'm not a big believer in music, I think there are a couple of things that do it well. So I'm going to put it one spot below D tier into C tier. Next, we have watching movies. Watching movies is a very easy thing to do. It's very easy to get yourself to watch movies. And it also appeals to many different language levels. So if you just start out, you can watch movies with subtitles in your native language. Or if you are very advanced in your language, you can just watch it without any subtitles. Or if you're kind of in the middle, you can watch it with subtitles, but in your target language. So there are many different ways to do it. So no matter where you're at, you will have some level of comprehensible input that you can use to practice. The only thing it doesn't have going for it is that it doesn't really do a good job at teaching you to speak the language. So for that reason, it may not be as high as it could be, but it's still a very solid way to learn a language, so I'm going to put it in A tier. Next, we have learning in a classroom. Traditionally, I've not liked learning in a classroom, but the more I think about it, the more I like it, and this is for a couple of reasons. The first is that it gives you a base. So when you first start out, it will teach you the very basics of stuff, the very beginner level aspects of a language, and from there, you can build your way up in a very linear progression, which is wonderful. Because with other language learning methods, you may struggle to get the basics of a language down, and then some rules may not make so much sense. But if you start from the beginning and work your way up, you can figure out what the basic rules are and then figure out the exceptions, instead of only hearing the exceptions, thinking that's a rule, and tripping yourself up. And this could go for many different aspects of the language, not just grammar, but you get the idea. The progression from beginner to expert is very ideal. Secondly, it's very expensive to take classes, so you're going to want to force yourself to go to class, do your homework, and study the language. Because if not, then you're throwing away $1,000 or however much your course is. It's just very expensive, which is very motivating, and the more you're able to get yourself to be around the language, the better off you'll be. So because it's very motivating, it's going to be very high on the tier list. Lastly, the later courses are taught in the target language, which is very beneficial in understanding what is being said when you are forced to being taught that way. However, there are many things that I dislike about learning in a classroom. The first is that there's a heavy emphasis on grammar when this doesn't really matter as much in real life. Secondly, it doesn't teach you any slang, and most importantly, it does a very poor job at teaching you how to speak. Sometimes, if you get a good class, they will teach you how to speak, but many times they just won't. And you may understand the language, but going out and speaking it may be very difficult. And for that reason, it is not, an optimal strategy, but it is very, very good because it forces you to go and practice it. So I'm going to put it in A tier above movies because it is much more thorough in how it teaches you the language. Next, we have Immersion. Instant S tier. You can't get better than Immersion. If you go to the country that speaks your target language, you will learn your target language because it's the only way you're going to be able to get around. So if you want to survive, you need to know it, which means that you will learn it, or else life's going to be very hard for you. So for that reason, it is S tier. There is nothing better than Immersion. Flashcards. Flashcards are kind of peculiar because they cater to different experience levels. So if you are very inexperienced with the language, flashcards are very useful for getting a foundational vocabulary. But if you are a little more advanced in the language, you're going to find better ways to learn and expand your vocabulary than flashcards. And because it's not as useful as something as, say, ChatGPT, but it isn't the worst thing to use in the world either. Like I said, it's very, very good for beginners. For that reason, I'm going to put it in C tier above music because of how useful it is for people just starting out in their target language. Next, we have Pimsleur. I've never used Pimsleur. From my understanding, the general idea is that it is just 30 minutes of comprehensible input spoken to you. Occasionally you say some things back. 30-minute lessons, and I think like 60 lessons in total. Like the classroom thing, it's the ordered progression is really, really nice and really, really effective. And it also has a heavy emphasis on understanding and listening, which is critically important, especially when you first begin to learn a language. I'm going to put Pimsleur in B tier. I think it's better than flashcards and music because it has such a heavy emphasis on listening. But coincidentally, that's also the same thing that's holding it back. It really only focuses on listening, whereas classroom learning focuses on a variety of different aspects of learning language, and watching TV is just too easy to not be above Pimsleur. Although Pimsleur is expensive, it's really easy to just buy it and then forget about it, say you don't have time, whatever. So for that reason, it's going below watching movies and learning in a classroom. Next, we have Babbel. I don't know much about Babbel either, but from my understanding, it mimics the classroom learning, but online. And I've heard the courses are also pretty expensive. I do like what it tries to do. Unfortunately, it's just not as good as the real thing, so of course it's going to be below A tier. I'm going to put it above C tier as well, just because I think it's more comprehensive than flashcards are, and it's definitely more effective than music is. However, I think because ChatGPT does such a nice job at being well-rounded in the different things you can do with it, whereas Babbel has a very set lesson plan, I'm going to put Babbel below ChatGPT. Although, like I said earlier, the linear progression from very beginner to expert is really nice and really helpful. Next, we have Duolingo. D tier. Don't use Duolingo if you don't have to. It's very bad at teaching you a language. It's very good at exposing you to a language, very bad at teaching it. So if you can stay away from Duolingo, stay away from Duolingo. If you are beginning to learn a language and trying to get into it, then I think Duolingo is a great option. But other than that very niche case, there isn't really a reason to use it. So that's going in D tier. Next, we have reading. Reading is better than flashcards for sure, because it allows you to learn many more words than you would using flashcards. It takes less time than flashcards because you have to write the flashcards and set everything up, but in a book, you just open it and start reading. All you have to do is buy it or rent it or whatever and actually read it. And the reason that reading is so good for your vocabulary is because it forces you to recall the word many, many times. Whereas flashcards, you kind of get sick of just, the standalone word and that's it. But when you read, you're forced to look it up if you want to understand what is being said. And if you look it up, that's very annoying, it's very time consuming. So you want to do it less. It's negative reinforcement. And if you come across the same word over and over, you'll just naturally start to get better at understanding what it means. So for that reason, it's better than flashcards. In my opinion, it's better than Babbel because it is so good at teaching you vocabulary. It does one thing very well, and that is expose you to a lot of different words in a foreign language, and it does it very, very well. That is more effective than all of the things that Babbel provides. However, I don't think it's better than ChatGPT because of the functionality and the diversity that ChatGPT offers to learners. So I'm going to put it in B tier in between ChatGPT and Babbel. Next up, we have Conversation. And I think that Conversation is the next best thing to Immersion. And although it is very difficult, it's very intimidating, it's very daunting to speak to somebody in their native language, in your target language, and you definitely don't know it as well as them. You're going to be exposing your ineptitude of the language to somebody who speaks it natively, which is very terrifying and slightly embarrassing. But once you get into the habit, and once you force yourself to do it, you get really good at the language really quickly. It is incredibly effective. Shame is a good teacher. It is incredibly effective at teaching you the language very quickly. It teaches you the basics. It teaches you how to listen. It teaches you how to speak. It gives you a chance to look up vocabulary that you need to know because you're going to be talking about many different topics. And vice versa. They may say something that you don't understand. You need to look it up and build your vocabulary that way. You can also ask the person to correct your grammar mistakes. So you can also learn grammar through this way as well. Although it's a little bit more tricky than classroom setting because it's not as linear and it's not as clear cut. And the speaker also doesn't correct you all the time. So when you make a mistake, you may not know that you made a mistake. But other than those couple of things, like I said earlier, it is incredibly effective. If you want to learn the language as quickly as you can with limited resources, this is how you do it. You find somebody who knows the language natively and speak with them. And if you are fluent in a language that they want to get fluent in, then you can teach them that language. You can do a little language swap. That's what I did with Portuguese. I was convincing people. I was 4th year when I was learning it for 1 year. Crazy effective. It works very, very well. Lastly, we have grammar books. I would honestly say it's worse than Duolingo. And my reason for this is you buy it and then it sits over there. Oh, you can't see it. Sits over there. I'm pointing to a bookshelf and you'll never use it. It'll collect dust because it's not engaging and it's grammar. Very few people like grammar and it's just such a bland read. It's such a chore. If you get a book, you have to be incredibly disciplined to use it. I would consider myself very disciplined. I cannot learn using grammar books. I can't do it. So wouldn't recommend it to anybody. And in my opinion, it's worse than Duolingo. At least with Duolingo, you learn something. It's very little for the amount of time you put in. Very little. But you do learn something. You buy a grammar book, you're not going to use it. I'm sorry, there's no grades, there's no motivation. It's just going to sit. And that's just the truth. And I'm sorry. But maybe you're special. Maybe you want to prove me wrong. Go prove me wrong. But 99% of you, it's just going to sit. So my final thing I want to say is that if possible, immerse yourself in the language. It's the best way to learn a language. S tier way to learn a language, do it if you can. D tier methods, don't touch them. Well, if you're just starting out, you can use Duolingo, but that's a very niche case. Don't touch D tier if you can. A through C tier is where you're going to want to combine most of your efforts. Most of it will be classroom learning or conversation with supplemental learning from, say, movies or flashcards or music. Or you could do an online course such as Babbel and Pimsleur with the other supplementary learnings as well. And those are the most effective ways to learn a language. Put on a tier list. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day, and I'll hopefully see you in another one of my videos. Ciao.